So today we're going to talk about Halloween. Is it a commercial holiday that is just innocent fun, or is it quote unquote demonic and evil? What camp do you fall in? Or are there even more beliefs and thoughts that come with this holiday? Let's dive into it. Welcome back to Soulful Wonderings, the space where we search for meaning in everyday life and honor the lessons that help us grow. I'm Heather and I'm your host. Before we get started, we would love it if you would subscribe to our podcast. That really helps us out. And you can also head over to our socials and follow us there. I'll make sure to put those in the show notes. Basically, look for Soulful Wonderings on Facebook and Instagram. And I have a quick reminder about our Healing Lens email series. This is where, through my lens, I capture images and stories that become prompts for your own healing journey. You can sign up to receive the Healing Lens email on our website, which is soulfulwonderings.com. I will put that in the show notes as well. And that is now underway at the time of this recording. So we would love it if you would join us for that. But back to Halloween, because it's October, yay! It's still hot as fuck down here, but it's not as hot. So for us, that's what you get here. It's not really cool weather yet. It's just not as hot weather, which for us, that means fall is here. I'm sure for other areas of the country. Hopefully you guys actually have some cool weather and beautiful leaves and all the things that represent fall. But the thing I'm curious about is Halloween. I'm wondering, how did you guys grow up? How do you view Halloween? So I know in my house, it just, I don't know, it just wasn't a thing. My mom didn't seem to really like it. And I don't remember sort of doing Halloween. And, even as I got older, I don't remember really doing anything around Halloween. Got into college, and I don't know, in my mind, I think it felt really dark. And I believe that was my conditioning. I really do. I believe conditioning was telling me that it was this sort of, demonic, evil, dark thing. I even did a project back in college, and I think I still have it somewhere, which is crazy. But I talked about some of the traditions and where they came from, or what the rumor was about that thing. But still, even with that, and even with kind of knowing more about it, I just never participated or celebrated, though. But as I got older, and of course I had a child, it was, I don't know, it got to be kind of fun. Maybe for me, it was the planning and the creativity of the costume. I really got into that part, because we never bought store-bought costumes, and hey, look, more power to you if that's what you do, because some of them are really fun and really elaborate. And of course, let's be honest, that's easy, especially if you have multiple kids or you're super busy or you just don't want, being able to go and buy a costume. I mean, what a great thing. How fabulous is that? I just had this thing about, I wanted it to be something we made. It just seemed more fun to do it that way. So we would buy, the pieces and kind of put it all together ourselves. And some of them were pretty creative, if I do say so myself. One year my son had a cast on his arm. He had broken his arm. And there was an anime character, I think it was anime, that he liked. Should have looked up the name of that. Can't remember who it was. But anyway, this guy had his arm in a cast as well. That was part of his thing. So that was super easy, and I remember it was raining. It was raining pretty hard that year, if I remember right. But people were still going out because it wasn't storming. It was just raining. And I remember my husband wrapping up his arm in saran wrap that's a brand name. Y'all know what I mean, right? Plastic wrap. But anyway, my husband like wrapped up his whole arm in the plastic wrap so that he could go out and trick or treat. And it was pretty fun. And when I saw a picture, of course, we went off a picture of the character. And I think we found an outfit that was pretty close. We found things that worked for the outfit. And then, of course, my mother-in-law made him this cape, and of course, we were able to then make it to fit him just right instead of having to, order something that we didn't know if it would fit. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that one. One year, he was actually Jack Frost. We had actually just recently seen the movie Rise of the Guardians at that time, which, by the way, I think is an amazing movie. It's based on a series of books, actually by a local Louisiana author. His name is William Joyce, and there's several movies and things that are based on his books. Roly Polioli is a show we used to watch that was based on his, I believe Meet the Robinsons, the movie, is based on his books. Anyway, I really like him, and I loved Rise of the Guardians. I thought it was really fun, and my son liked it as well. But I digress, talking about William Joyce. But he's just someone that they are children's books, but they're really good. You might enjoy them, so check them out. Anyway, like I said, I digress. But if you look at the character Jack Frost in the movie, he basically had what looked like a pair of khaki pants and a blue sweatshirt. So that's what we did. We got khaki pants, blue sweatshirt. I used some fabric paint and put the frost, on the shirt, the white paint to make it look like it had, ice on it. And interestingly enough, we found the perfect stick in the backyard that we were able to use as a staff. Of course, I spray painted it white, put some glitter and things like that to make it have kind of a frosty look. And we even used that, that spray hair color. We used that to make his hair white. So, it was fun, and it was fun to put that together and work together on that. And from my perspective, from that perspective, I didn't see the harm in it. It was fun. It's this commercial thing. It's about going to get candy, and it felt harmless, right? And I had sort of looked past my hate or dislike for the holiday to have fun with my son. But the question was, why did I hate it so much? And I started to think about that a lot more. Like I said, as I worked with him over the years to do those things. Why had my mom seem to dislike it so much? And did she actually say that, or was she just not into it and that's just what I remember? I'm actually not completely sure about that. And of course, one has to wonder if, given the things I've discovered about my family and what is evidently a bit of a witchy connection, perhaps she wanted to stay away from it, just like she never shared this ancestral information that I figured out. Maybe she just didn't want to go there, Did she think it would entice me down a dark path, That seems a little odd, but you never know, and it's really hard to say. And I guess I feel like now, if I'm able to connect with her, through the medium means, that's not really high on my list of things that I'm discussing, And here's the thing, I've had friends that felt the same way, they were raised as Christians, and Halloween was just kind of a no-no. There does seem to be a connection by some to the darker side of this holiday, or at least that's what they perceive. And you have folks that connection to that darker side is what they love. You know who I'm talking about, right? They're sweet and perky and bright and just lovely people. I have a friend. Well, she actually passed away, but I have a friend that was very much like that. She was always this sort of bright, always wearing bright pink lipstick and things like that. But let me tell you something. She was one of those people that would, feel perfectly comfortable and fall asleep watching a show about serial killers. You know what I'm saying? You know who I'm talking about. Y'all all have a friend like that. I know you do. And Halloween, she loved Halloween. She would have all these decorations in her office and whatnot. There are some that I think just kind of gravitate towards those darker things. They like the skulls and the bats and just all of it, you know. And I'm kind of going to get into a little bit of that next time. But for now, I want to focus on the holiday. And here's the thing. I'm actually finding myself gravitating towards it as well, at least the witchy parts of it. And this is kind of within the past few years, kind of since I started this little journey. It just seems more normal and comfortable. Not all the dark stuff. I don't mean the really dark stuff, but there are just parts of it that are just fun to me now. And the truth is, I've always liked fall. I think fall is probably one of my favorite times of year, in normal places, not here. This time of year would be when it starts to be cooling off, and I don't know, there's something about that little crisp air when you walk outside, and I love a fun sweater and comfy pair of boots and whatnot. So it's just, and the colors, y'all, the colors, and pumpkins everywhere and the leaves are changing color. I love fall. But now I'm like, but first, spooky time. Did y'all see all those memes? I saw several online that, like on July 5th, that they're like, it's Halloween. And people are like, it's July. It's Halloween. It's after July 4th. Damn it, it's Halloween. And I think that's kind of how I feel. I held myself back. I didn't start putting out my fall decorations. I waited until right at the end of September. So I think I did pretty good, but it was hard. But looking at how I feel about it now, it's almost like before I was holding myself back, and now I'm going, but what is the deal with Halloween? Is it really so bad? But why do we carve pumpkins? Why do we dress up in costumes? Is it really this evil holiday, or is it just a myth? And how do different religions and cultures see it? Well, according to my research, Halloween's roots reach back over 2,000 years to the Celtic festival of Samhain. Did I say that right? Samhain. I think that's right. We're going to say Samhain, and then if I'm wrong, just please forgive me and somebody tell me how to say it properly. Anyway, so the Celtic holiday, it was celebrated in what is now Ireland, Scotland, and parts of Northern Europe. So Samhain marked the end of the harvest season, or the light half of the year, and it was the beginning of winter, which is what they saw as sort of the darker half of the year. And the Celtics believed that on this night, the boundary between the living and the spirit world grew thin. How often do you hear people say that? I know I kind of feel that especially around October, you hear people say that the veil is thin this time of year. I think that's what they're talking about. I think that's where that's coming from. But they believed that the spirits could pass through, basically, and that this could be both helpful, if you had helpful ancestors coming through, but it could also be ones that might be a bit, let's say, mischievous or truthfully even harmful. So, to protect themselves, the people lit these massive bonfires, and they would also offer food to the spirits. And sometimes they would wear costumes or perhaps animal skins, because the hope was they would confuse any of those wandering souls that meant them harm. Maybe they wouldn't recognize them because of the costume. So it was really much less about, worshiping evil and more about survival and protection. And in truth, they were in a lot of ways honoring the dead. Now, fast forward to the 8th century, and the Catholic Church designated November 1st as All Saints' Day. So this is a time where they honor holy men and holy women. So the evening before became known as All Hallows' Eve. And really just kind of over time, I think people just shortened it to Halloween. But the truth is, it is All Hallows' Eve. Now, I believe this when you look at it from these perspectives, the blending of Christian and folk traditions is important because you have people who were already celebrating Samhain, and the church kind of layered in its own festival on top of it. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? When you look at a lot of traditions in the Catholic, not the Catholic Church, but the Christian churches, well, Catholic too, I guess, and how they, I'm going to say, adopted other traditions and other things. So, anyway, again, I digress. So, really, the old customs, it's not that they vanished, they just basically, they transformed some of those things. The bonfires, honoring the dead, even wearing costumes, basically all found a new meaning, but in a Christian context. We already talked about All Saints Day, November 1st, and then later you had November 2nd, which is All Souls Day. Again, All Saints Day celebrates all the holy souls that are in heaven. All Souls Day, that's going to be November 2nd, is a day to pray for and commemorate the souls of the faithful departed, particularly those in purgatory who are awaiting purification before entering heaven. That's a Catholic thing there. So you see how they started to kind of look at those days and look at a way that they could, I believe, look at a way that they could celebrate as well. Yeah, like I said, sounds familiar, doesn't it? And there are some other customs. Okay, so we mentioned this a little bit of how they sort of developed or adopted some of these customs. So, for instance, the bonfires. As we said before, Christianity, the Celts, they lit these huge fires to ward off harmful spirits and to mark this seasonal transition, right? Well, in the Christian context, bonfires continued, but they took on a symbolic meaning. It was, quote unquote, holy fire, representing Christ as the light conquering the darkness. You had some places that also lit candles or fires to honor saints and souls in purgatory. You see a lot of candle lighting in the Catholic Church. We also talked about the honoring the dead. As we said before, Christianity, people left offerings of food and drink for their spirits or for ancestors. But in the Christian context, the focus shifted to praying for the souls of the departed, and that's especially on All Souls Day. And offerings became things like prayers, candles in cemeteries, and, food shared with the poor, perhaps. Sometimes they were given as what they called soul cakes. And of course, we can't forget the costume and the disguises. Before Christianity, masks or animal skins, like we said, were worn to confuse the wandering spirits. But in the Christian context, in medieval Europe, costumes became part of souling or guising, and this involved children and the poor dressing up, and they would go door to door for food in exchange for prayers for the dead. It still carried the idea of the spiritual disguise, but woven into a Christian ritual of charity and intercession. So I guess in short, the church didn't erase these customs, it just reinterpreted them. What had once been about appeasing or protecting against spirits was reframed as remembering saints, praying for souls, and celebrating the victory of light and holiness over darkness. So, I believe in short, Halloween as we know it, it's really a mix of these pagan origins that are braided together with the Christian holy days. There's even a couple more traditions that we can look at when it comes to Halloween and kind of how they've changed. One we haven't discussed yet is the jack-o'-lanterns. In Ireland and Scotland, people would carve faces into turnips or potatoes to ward off spirits. A legend tells of Stingy Jack, who was a trickster, who made a deal with the devil, and he was doomed to wander the earth with a burning ember inside a hollowed turnip. Now, of course, when immigrants brought the tradition to America, they found pumpkins, which were bigger and easier to carve, and truly they were far more dramatic. I mean, think about it, those things are bigger. So the pumpkin jack-o'-lantern was born out of that tradition. And of course, we talked about costumes, which was the idea of disguising yourself to confuse the wandering spirits, the guising or the souling that we mentioned before. That grew into what is modern day trick-or-treating. But the truth is, the phrase trick-or-treat didn't actually show up until it was the early 1900s in North America. By, I think it's around the 30s or the 40s, it had just become a children's tradition. And of course, after World War II, after we went through all that, depression, all the things, the candy companies that were making sure that it became a big business, right? That's really how or when Halloween turned into the commercial holiday that we know today, full of candy and costumes and decorations. So here's the big question, or back to the big question. Is Halloween demonic or evil? Well, I think the short answer is not really. Early Samhain, it wasn't about devil worship at all. The Celts didn't even have that concept. They were focused on spirits and ancestors and survival, quite frankly. The scary parts, skeletons and witches and ghosts and all that, were really more about symbolizing death and mystery, I think. And that said, over time, there were some groups, especially in the Christian world, that probably grew a bit uncomfortable with the holiday, because it highlights spirits and death and magic. And I think there are Christians that saw and probably continue to see that as kind of a dangerous flirtation with the occult. I'm not sure that that's really what it is, but, when you start to see some of the things that are discussed, I get how they got there, right? And you even today will see churches that kind of advise against celebrating it, and they may even choose to have alternatives, things like maybe a harvest festival, or I find the trunk or treat events are kind of an attempt to give it a family friendly thing that they can do. But there are also plenty of Christians, who see it as just harmless fun. It's just a cultural celebration, rather than any kind of spiritual threat or really even any kind of spiritual event. They just see it as it's become what it was, a cultural celebration. I think it just depends on how you approach it. If you focus on the candy and the costumes, or if you focus on kind of the darker themes. And I will say, I think you could do a bit of both. I'm going to dive into this for just a second, because I don't want to get into this in this episode as much. But, I hear a lot of people that, especially ones that aren't necessarily happy with the Christian religion, that will talk about how a lot of the traditions in Christianity are based in pagan traditions, and they're not wrong. But as you can see, I don't think any harm was meant when that happened. Do you see what I'm saying? They saw, yes, it's a celebration of the dead, of the ancestors. And like I said, I didn't dive in too deep into, what the Christians were thinking, basically, when they adopted some of these things. But yes, I think it is fair to say that there are many Christian traditions that are an adoption or an adaptation or whatever of pagan holidays and pagan things. Yes, I think that's very true. I think that doesn't, I don't think it takes away from either sort of side of what you believe. And I think to me, it's important that we kind of remember that there's a lot of playing the blame game here, that, we started it and you just changed it. Yeah, that may be very true, and there may be reasons behind that. Um, and I won't deny that some of the people that decided some of those things may not have done it for the best reasons. They did it for selfish reasons. But I also believe that a lot of Christians, they believe this in they mean no harm. They are actually trying to serve the God that they believe in, and I believe in that same God. And a lot of them, I don't know that they know that some of these rituals came from that have the pagan undertones, I guess. So I'm going to give them I think we all need to give it an opportunity to, maybe it's a place for common ground versus so much animosity. And I get the reasons why on both sides. I really do. There are a lot of people that have, I'm going to call it church injury. Things happened and, they really got hurt. And so I get it. I really do. And I get how you feel like maybe it got stolen and now you're claiming it as your own and all those things. I get all of those things. But the truth is, at the end of the day, it may be an opportunity for common ground, because a lot of these things that happen, none of us that are here right now are the ones that created that. We're the ones that have chosen to continue them. So perhaps learning from each other and having discussions about how some of these things came to be and why we believe in them so much. Again, it may give us a place to find common ground and discover that there may be things about us that aren't quite so different after all. So that's my soapbox on that. I'm going to get off of that for now, because we will go back to that another day. But this is another example of times where some of the things that were created, they did have, it was a pagan tradition that was kind of adopted. So again, it's a very, very good time for conversation where perhaps we can all learn from each other on things like that. Okay, so let's move on from that. I do want to talk about a few other cultures or, religions and kind of how they look at this time of year. Y'all, the Mexican culture, and it's so beautiful, and I feel so bad about how badly I'm about to butcher this. I don't know why I can't say it right. Dia de los Muertos? Muertos? That's close, huh? Okay. You know what I'm talking about? The Day of the Dead. It's actually celebrated, that's like a November 1st and 2nd, I think. And this is where families basically welcome back the spirits of their departed loved ones for a reunion. It's really quite lovely. If anyone's ever seen the movie Coco, that to me is very, and I hope it's a proper representation. I've never actually looked to see if it was. I know it's lovely, and I hope it is, because like I said, if that is what I was really learning in that movie, it's so beautiful. But if my understanding is that it combines basically Aztec traditions, probably ancient Aztec traditions, with Spanish customs. But it's a time to honor ancestors, and you're creating altars with, their favorite foods and favorite items, visiting their graves and sharing stories. It's really a beautiful time of year for them, and I think it's something that we're seeing more and more of from that culture. I find I see it represented a lot more than I used to, and which is really, really neat. I actually want to learn more about that. So that's a big one, that if you don't know about it, perhaps take some time to learn about that, because it's very interesting. Now, many neo-pagans and Wiccans, they most likely will celebrate Samhain as a spiritual festival. They are generally continuing the ancient traditions of honoring their ancestors, so it's really lovely as well. In many Muslim and Jewish communities, Halloween is it's seen as a secular event at best. And I think a lot of them are going to kind of discourage it because of its pagan ties, which I can understand from those communities. So, folks from those backgrounds, those religions Halloween may not be a thing for them. And in places like Japan or China, where they have their own ancestor festivals, Halloween is, I think it's often seen as just kind of imported fun, the Western style costume day rather than anything spiritual and observance. I think they're kind of seeing it as the commercial fun thing that it is. So really, I think around the world, Halloween, as it were, is kind of it's constantly being reinterpreted. I think it's kind of spooky fun for some people. It's sacred for others, and it's kind of off limits for a few people. So as I did this research and was reading through some of this stuff, again, there's so much I could have gotten more in depth on, and we may come back to that at another time. But it kind of feels like Halloween's a little bit complicated. It's complicated. Is that what they used to do? You could put your status on your on your Facebook profile, you're in a relationship or you're single, or it's complicated. I feel like the relationship with Halloween is complicated. Because there's some ancient stuff in there, ancient ideas and rituals. You've got some things that the Christians adopted that I think are very lovely and very interesting. You've got a little bit of that American invention that kind of really made it a commercial thing. And then it's really part of pop culture. And I think it might be fair to say that that's a global thing. So, I don't know that Halloween is inherently evil, but it does carry some pretty deep symbols of death and the afterlife and the spirit world. But for some, it's, it's really just really simple. It's about candy and costumes and having fun. And for others, it's a time to reflect on those that came before us. Maybe that's what makes it powerful. Halloween kind of holds a mirror up to our fears. It holds a mirror to our beliefs, and maybe even in some ways our sense of play. Whether you light a candle, whether you decide to carve a pumpkin, or you want to pass out candy this year, you're stepping into a tradition that's, it's thousands of years old. So I want to leave you with a few prompts to reflect on. I know I was reflecting on these, especially this first one. So when you think about Halloween, what do you see? Is it something that's just playful fun? Is it something that's, a bit spiritual? Maybe it's an opportunity for you to really connect to your spirituality. Or is it something troubling? I'm going to be completely honest. I think for me, it's a bit of all of those. I think it can be fun. It's awesome. It to me, it kind of shines a light on some things that I do, some things I'm interested in my spiritual path. And then there are things that are absolutely troubling that I'm good to do without. So I encourage you to see how you think about it. Another is, what traditions from your own culture or your family shape the way you see death, your ancestors, or even the unseen? And lastly, if you were to create your own ritual for this season, what would it honor or protect? What would it be about for you? Thanks for wandering with me through the history of Halloween. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things, and that you will take a moment to reflect on how you feel about this time of year, this season, this holiday. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, we're never walking this path alone.